Hey, so it's great to be here. Thank you, Connor, for that nice introduction. It's great to be here for at least two reasons. Number one, here in Madison, is that, number one, I grew up in a city somewhat similar to Madison. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. Oh, come on. Come on. I'm not wearing scarlet and gray. I'm wearing the neutral colors of maize and blue. No, but Columbus is similar. Columbus is sort of like Madison without all of the ferocious excitement in nightlife. It's a university town, a town of nonprofits, white-collar town, Midwestern values, state capital. So every time I come here, it reminds me of being in Columbus. The other reason that I'm glad to be here is that one of the virtues of Central Ohio, and the list is not that long. One of the virtues of Central Ohio is that Central Ohio, as Greg can attest, Central Ohio, and Ohio in general, has one of the best library systems in the entire country, partly because of the way that Ohio funds libraries. Ohio funds libraries with property taxes, so there's this endless stream of funding coming to libraries. And I would say, and when I grew up, I spent a huge amount of time in libraries, and I would say that if it weren't for libraries, I would not be a writer. I think it's manifest as day. I probably learned more going to the public library on my own and reading my own stuff, reading what I wanted to read, following my own interests, than I did in school. And so I'm grateful to libraries. I love libraries. I have that kind of deep-seated kind of, how a duckling gets sort of whatever the first impression that a duckling sees. I sort of like the duckling for libraries. Like I figure I'll follow the library anywhere. Truly, one of the happiest days of my life was the day that I realized that I had a Dewey Decimal number. I'm not kidding. First book, 331.25. So let me tell you about this book here. I'm going to give you a quick taste of this layest book that I wrote. I want to tell you about why I wrote it, tell you about one big idea in there. I put together a few graphics that you can see on the screens, if you can see the screens. So let me tell you about why I wrote this book. So this is a book. The book is called When Scientific Seeks to Perfect Timing. I wrote it out of a sense of frustration. That's how I started writing this book. I was frustrated. I was making all kinds of timing decisions in my own life. When should I go to the gym? When should I do certain kinds of work? When should I start a project? When should I abandon a project that's not working? And I was making these decisions in a very haphazard and sloppy way. That frustrated me. So there's got to be a better way to make these kinds of decisions. And I started looking around for guidance, and I realized there wasn't any. And that got me curious. So the last several books that I've written have touched on social science, trying to look at large bodies of social science, make sense of it, and talk to lay people about what it means for their lives. And so out of curiosity, I started looking around and saying, there's got to be a little bit of research on timing. There's a lot of bit of research on timing. There was a huge amount of research on timing. There was a monumental amount of research on timing, but it had a certain characteristic, and the characteristic was reflective of, I think, large organizations and certainly universities. Those of you who work for big companies often will complain, oh, my company is so siloed, right? We got people working here and people working here, and they don't talk to each other, and they don't know what the other one is doing. And I say, meet a large university if you want to see siloing. It's extraordinary. So what you had, I discovered, were people in all kinds of different disciplines asking what amounted to very similar questions. So questions like this: how does time of day affect what we do and how we do it? How do beginnings affect our behavior? How do midpoints affect our behavior? How do endings affect our behavior? How do groups synchronize in time? How does the way we think about time shape our behavior? But this research wasn't being done in only one field. It was being done literally in dozens of fields. And so the problem was that it was being done in some of the work was being done in economics, but the economics weren't talking to it was being done in economics, it was being done in social psychology, it's being done in molecular biology. There's a whole field called chronobiology. It's being done in anesthesiology and endocrinology, all over the place. But the economists weren't talking to the psychologists weren't talking to the anthropologists, nobody was talking to the endocrinologists, perhaps understandably. And yet they were all asking these very similar questions. And I found that if you go wide enough and deep enough into this research, this incredible multidisciplinary body of research, you can begin to piece together the evidence-based ways to make smarter, better, shrewder decisions about when to do things. So the big idea, if there is one here, is that we believe that timing is an art, but it's really a science. We make our decisions about timing based on intuition and guesswork, and that's the wrong way to make them. We can make them based on evidence. We can make them based on data. We can make them based on facts. And so this body of research, again, spread all the way across these different disciplines, is some of it's mind-boggling, all of it is fascinating, and it answers a whole range of questions about some mundane aspects of our lives, but even bigger questions about the human condition. So small questions like this: when should you exercise, early in the day or late? Very clear answer to that question. I don't intend to give it to you, but there's a very clear page 44. Just go to page 44 in your hymn book, everybody rise, and we'll read it out loud. No. Why should you never go into a hospital or schedule an important doctor appointment in the afternoon? For reals, folks. Don't do this. We're going to talk about this. Why does beginning your career in a recession depress your wages 20 years later? Some really alarming research from Lisa Kahn at Yale about how the initial labor market conditions, at the beginning of your career, have an enormous effect on what you earn literally 2 decades later. It's in some ways terrifying. Why don't teams actually get started until the midpoint of a project? This is research from Connie Gersick at UCLA, now at Yale, about how if you give a team this amount of time to do a project, they get started here. You give a team this amount of time, a lot of you are nodding on this, they get started here, all right? Why is that? What is it about midpoints that affect our behavior? Why are you most likely to run your first marathon at ages 29, 39, 49, and 59? This is from Adam Alter at UCLA, Adam Alter at NYU, and Hal Hirschfield at UCLA. Endings affect our behavior, so even something as arbitrary as the end of a life decade can have an energizing effect on us. So you have 29-year-olds are twice as likely to run a first marathon as 28-year-olds. 29-year-olds are twice as likely to run a first marathon as 30-year-olds. 49-year-olds are 3 times as likely to run a first marathon as 50-year-olds. Why is singing in a choir as good for your physical and mental health as exercise? Some incredible research on how groups coordinate in time and synchronize in time, and the effect that that has not only on our psychology but even on our physiology. And then, a whole range of other questions. I'm a full-service operation, so I like to answer questions across the range of our individual and collective experience. So this question right here, I hope it's not on your mind, but again, I'm here to answer it if it is. When during the year is your spouse most likely to file for divorce? And it turns out, if you look at the data, there are 2 severe, extreme monthly spikes. There are 2 months of the year where divorce filings all over the United States spike incredibly. The chart is just wacky. It's just like the 2 giant points way up there. So if you made it through last month, congratulations. March is one of those months. And you're good till August. So but what I want to do is talk in a little bit more depth about one particular aspect of timing, one particular aspect of the research, and that has to do with the day. One of the things that was a discovery for me as someone who didn't think a lot about time to begin with, is that much of what we think of time as somehow a natural force, and it's a sort of a philosophical debate, and it's an interesting conversation, but certain units of time that I thought were natural are actually not natural at all. Example, a second. A second is not a thing. It's something that human beings have made up. A week. A week is not a thing. It's something that human beings have made up. But a day is a thing. This is the level of scientific sophistication I'm bringing to all of you here today at lunch, right? Okay? A day is a thing. Right? It's a real thing. We're on a planet, the planet turns. So let's talk, I'm going to give you a little taste of what does the research tell us about how the day, what happens to us over the course of a day, this fundamental unit of time. And what we know is that the hidden pattern of the day profoundly affects our mood and our performance. The hidden pattern of the day profoundly affects our mood and our performance. I'm going to hit you with a little bit of science here. I'm going to tell you about a few studies, and then we're going to pay it off with what to do about it. So one of the interesting things going on in the world of research is big data. Now, big data, to my mind, is woefully overhyped in the short run and woefully underhyped in the long run. This is a big deal. Our ability over time to collect massive amounts of data and look for stuff in it, manipulate it, analyze it, is going to be groundbreaking. We're at a very primitive stage right now, both in our ability to collect it and our ability to analyze it. We haven't seen anything yet. But even at this primitive stage, that we're getting insights that are pretty remarkable. Let me give you an example of that. Linguistic inquiry word count, LIWC, pronounced Luke. And it's basically a ginormous text analyzer. So we can take any body of text and analyze it for certain things. So we could take the novels of Toni Morrison, take all the novels of Toni Morrison, put those into the program, and it will tell you how often does Toni Morrison use passive tense? How often does she use active tense? How often are female characters speaking? How often are male characters speaking? All kinds of, how often is a setting in light? How often is a setting in dark? And so, and among the things this program can do, and this program is actually, we're going to look at this as very, very primitive in 10 years. This program, which is super cool right now, is going to be seen as primitive in 10 years. I don't know if any of you are old enough, some of you look old enough, as old as I am, to remember, some of you look older than me. Any of you old enough to remember WordPerfect? Anybody ever used? Okay, there you go. So this is basically, this program, which is super cool, it's kind of like WordPerfect. It's like, at the time we thought it was the greatest thing ever. Now you're like, oh my God, how did I ever get any writing done on WordPerfect, all right? So what these two researchers at Cornell did is they used this program, and they used a more intriguing body. They used a body of text that I think is pretty intriguing. They used tweets. They collected 500 million tweets. Okay, because this program is agnostic about what kind of text you feed it. Tweets are words. This program just gobbles words. 500 million tweets, 500 million tweets from 2.5 million users in 84 countries. 500 million tweets, none of them from the current president of the United States. And they throw these things into this program, and all they're measuring here is something that's actually relatively simple to measure, is do the words in these tweets, do they convey positive sentiment, negative sentiment, or neutral sentiment? What is the emotional, sort of the emotional valence of these words? Positive, negative, neutral. They throw these tweets into the program. Remember, tweets are time-stamped. All right, so what we can do then is plot the emotions against time of day and see whether these 500 million tweets reflect any kind of pattern in mood over the course of a day. And here's what they found out. I'm going to show you. I got a couple of charts for you because I love charts. Here we go. What they saw was this: a peak, a trough, and a recovery. Mood went up, mood went down, mood then recovered. So if you can, those of you who can see the chart will realize that right now we are on a downswing. So sorry about that. All right, mood went up, mood went down, and mood recovered. Peak, trough, recovery. Think about that for a moment. There's another methodology from another discipline. There's a fellow named Daniel Kahneman, who many of you have heard of, who has some terrific books in that, or at least one terrific book in that library called Thinking Fast and Slow. I encourage you to read that book. He's a psychologist who won the Nobel Prize in economics. He came up with a methodology working with some economists, including a fellow named Alan Kruger, who was an economist at Princeton and was the head of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Obama. They came up with a methodology called the day reconstruction method, where what you do is you give people essentially empty notebooks, and you have them record the episodes of their life, the time of day, and describe their mood. So you would say something like, 7:30 in the morning, I'm commuting to work, I am frustrated, I am irritable, okay? Or, I would say, at 12:50 p.m., I'm in Madison, Wisconsin at Lunch for Libraries. I am joyful, ecstatic, excited beyond belief, that kind of thing. And so they took these hundreds and hundreds of these self-reports of these emotions, and they rendered them against time of day. And here's what they found. Here's their chart. A peak, a trough, and a recovery. Mood went up, mood went down, and then mood recovered. Early in the day, mood rose. In the middle of the day, mood fell, and later in the day, mood recovered. Now, take a look at these charts, if you can see these charts on your screen. These charts aren't identical, but they rhyme. Up, down, up. Up, down, up. And what's curious is that no matter what the discipline is, no matter what the methodology used, social psychologists, social scientists, and physical scientists, biological scientists, have been finding this pattern over and over again. In the course of a day, mood goes up, mood goes down, mood recovers. So, think about that. Now, let's talk about performance, because we care about mood, but we also care about performance. Many of the sponsors here are businesses. You are, BMO cares about performance, Zendesk cares about performance. All of you care about performance on the job. Does performance vary over the course of a day? Does this change in mood have an effect on our on our performance? Here's where it gets super duper interesting. All right? Let me give you another. There's so much good research on this. Let me give you one super cool study on this. It's a study from NYU. And these researchers at NYU also use this primitive text analyzing program. But it does a very good job of measuring the emotional valence of words. So they decided to use a different body of text. They decided to use the transcripts of public company earnings calls. Public companies have earnings calls every quarter. They report they're happening right now. You'll hear about them literally. Like if you pull out your phone and go to whatever your favorite financial app is, you will see companies having earnings calls today. They report their last quarter's earnings. They give guidance on future earnings. They looked at the transcripts of 26,000 earnings calls. Just think about reading. If you've ever seen these, it's barely tolerable to read one of these things. All right. But this program doesn't care. Feed me 26,000, I'll eat them up. 26,000 calls from 2,100 companies over 6.5 years. And they looked at, they were looking for something else, and they said, well, does the emotional content of these calls change based on time of day? Now, what might happen is that companies that are reporting terrible earnings are going to have negative mood, and companies reporting great earnings are going to have positive mood. So they control for that, and they found something very intriguing. Afternoon calls were more negative, irritable, and combative, leading to temporary stock mispricings for the firms hosting earnings calls later in the day. Okay, I heard a whoa out there. That is absolutely the response. This is a whoa. Think about that for a second. The people who are doing earnings calls are CEOs and CFOs of public companies. They had to have some ability to get those jobs, right? So they're like decently capable people. If you've ever encountered these calls, these CEOs and CFOs prepare for these calls like crazy. They have teams of people providing them talking points and data. They rehearse. They anticipate questions. They rehearse some more. They have scripts when they go into these calls. They are extraordinarily well prepared. And do these CEOs and CFOs have anything at stake in these earnings calls? Big time. Watch the news today when companies are reporting earnings calls. The stock can go up or down, and that makes literally millions, sometimes tens of millions of dollars of difference to their own compensation. So you have these talented people who are well prepared with something at stake, and even they leak. These diurnal patterns are so powerful that even they are expressing different emotions at different times of day, to the point, and this is the one I really want to emphasize, it's mispricing the stock. The afternoon earnings calls were sending the stock lower, below what its true price should be. And I'm convinced there is someone out there who has written a program to exploit the delta, the difference between the temporarily low mispriced stock and the true price. She's probably paying her way through UW right now with this program. And so what they say, these researchers say, which is rare because they're generally loath to give advice, an important takeaway from our study for corporate executives is that communications with investors and probably other critical managerial decisions and negotiations should be conducted earlier in the day. And this phenomenon you see with corporate earnings calls is true across a whole set of domains. Just two other examples here. Let's talk about standardized test scores. There's a brilliant piece of research out of studying Denmark, standardized test scores in Denmark. In Denmark, students take standardized tests on computers rather than on pencil and paper. And they take those tests, so they take these standardized tests on computers. But the typical Danish school has more students than computers. So everybody can't take the test at the same time. As a consequence, the students are randomly assigned to take the test at different times of day. So a lot of you are nodding. We got some scientists in the crowd here, right? They're randomly assigned to take the test at different times of day. This is the kind of thing that makes scientists weep. Random assignment of large populations, like some of you have tears welling in your eyes right now. This is such a beautiful, natural experiment that's occurring in the great nation of Denmark. Some students take the test in the morning, some students take the test in the afternoon, and we're not talking about a sample of 37 kids. We're talking 2 million test scores. What happens? Kids who take the test in the afternoon instead of the morning score as if they've missed 2 weeks of school. Got another quiet whoa out of that one. I think that deserves a bigger whoa, all right? Because you got this kid scoring here in the morning and this kid scoring here in the afternoon, and we're going to make decisions about education policy based on standardized test scores when there's this kind of divergence in time of day? Worse, are we going to make decisions about this kid based on the standardized test score, when if she had been randomly assigned over here, she might have scored better? Whoa, this is very scary. This is very scary. But let me scare you one last time. I want to talk about healthcare. And apparently so do you. Long story short, I do not let anybody in my family willingly, discretionarily go to a hospital or to an important doctor's appointment in the afternoon now, period. That simple. That simple. I have made changes in my own family's life and my own family's schedule based on this research. No one in the Pink family is allowed to, you have to get hit by a bus before I'm going to bring you to the hospital in the afternoon. All right? On anything discretionary, we do not do important doctor's appointments or any hospital visits in the afternoon, period. Full stop, no exceptions. I'll tell you why. The evidence here is freaking overwhelming. I'm just going to give you a tiny taste of it. Anesthesia errors, 4 times more likely at 3 p.m. than at 9 a.m. We've just had lunch. Let's talk about colonoscopies. Colonoscopies. Doctors find half as many polyps in afternoon exams as they do in morning exams for the same population. Hand washing in hospitals. You're laughing already, yeah, right? Hand washing in hospitals, which is already not as high as it ought to be. Hand washing in hospitals deteriorates, hand washing in hospitals plummets in the afternoon. Unnecessary antibiotics, doctors significantly more likely to prescribe unnecessary antibiotics in the afternoon, in afternoon exams. Over and over and over again we see this. Basically you look at judicial decision making, jury decision making, every domain of life, every domain of performance, we see differences in how people perform based on time of day. So let's talk about, let me just distill what we know and then what we can do about it. Here's what we know. There are 3 key points here. 1, this is super important. Our cognitive abilities don't remain static over the course of the day. Nobody ever told me this, right? A lot of times when we feel like our cognitive abilities aren't the same, we think of it as personal weakness, as wimpiness, as I gotta, maybe the people with a Y chromosome say, I gotta man up. Wait a second, I'm getting a little bit tired here. I gotta man up and do my work. I gotta power through. Our cognitive abilities don't remain the same over the course of the day. 2, these daily fluctuations are more extreme than we realize. The difference between the daily high point and the daily low point can be significant. 3, the best time to perform a task depends on the nature of the task. We do different kinds of things better at different times of day. Let me pay this off here. All right, I'm going to give you some design principles based on the science for when to do certain kinds of work. We begin with what's called a chronotype. That's basically your propensity to wake up early and go to sleep early, or wake up late and go to sleep late. Some people are larks, some people are owls, most people are in between. The distribution looks like this. It's not a bell curve of the distribution, but it's bellish. You got 15% of people are hardcore larks, hardcore morning people. You got about 20% of people are hardcore evening people, late night types. And owls, it's not a bell curve because you got 15 here, 20 here, but also owls have a very long tail. You have, statistically, I've actually never seen an owl, so I cannot assess the tail length of that bird. But the vast majority of us, about 2/3 of us, are in between. And here's what we know. You can think of the world as this. You have to know what your chronotype is. There are very easy ways to figure it out. and most of us have an intuitive sense anyway. Think about 80 and 20. 80% of us are not owls, 20% of us are owls. 80% of us move through the day basically like this. Peak early in the day, trough middle of the day, recovery later in the day. Owls are much more complicated. Any of you consider yourselves like nighttime types, go to sleep? Okay, so I feel your pain. If you work for large organizations, you work, corporate America basically, for all you owls, corporate America is designed to destroy your soul, to suck the marrow out of your bones and any life force that might remain. It is so difficult being an owl in this world. It is really, that's why a lot of owls go off and do their own thing. They sort of become self-employed, or they go into academia or something like that, where they can actually configure their own schedule. Owls are more complicated. They tend to have their peak later in the day. So here we go. Here's what we know. So we got the peak. For most of us, our morning in the day. The key characteristic of our peak is this. Single word, think about it. Vigilance. During a peak, that's when we're highest in vigilance. That's when we're most vigilant. What does that mean? Vigilance means we're able to bat away distractions. Distractions come in, we knock them out of the way. That makes it the ideal time for analytic work. Work that requires heads down, focus, and attention. Writing a legal brief, analyzing data, going methodically through the steps of a schedule. Work that requires that kind of heads down, intense focus and analytic firepower. And what you see is that there's experimental evidence showing that 80% of us, the larks and the people in the middle, what I call third birds, do their analytic work better in the morning, and owls do their analytic work better later in the day and in the evening. And even when you give them problems in analytic problems, you give an owl an analytic problem, you give a group of people an analytic problem at 10 in the morning, the larks and the third birds are likely to get it right, the owls are likely to miss it. You give an analytic problem to the same population at 8 o'clock in the evening, the owls are going to get it right, and the other people are going to miss it. Right? Vigilance. During the peak is when we should when we should be doing our analytic work that requires that heads down vigilance. The trough, that period early in the day, that's not good for very much. It really isn't. It really isn't. There's a whole array of other scary data. Let's talk about traffic accidents. Obviously, you're going to have more traffic accidents the more cars there are on the road. There's not a consistent number of cars on the road in the course of a day. So once you control for that, turns out the most dangerous time to be on the road in America is 4 to 6 a.m. I don't think that's a big surprise. Second most dangerous time, once you control for cars on the road, 2 to 4 p.m. It's amazing. So during the trough, we should be doing our administrative work. We should be answering our routine emails, filling out our TPS reports, doing the things that don't require massive amounts of cognitive firepower and creativity. Finally, the recovery. Recovery is an extremely interesting stage here, right? Because what we do, for those of us, the 80% of us, peak, trough, recovery. Our mood later in the day goes back up. However, we're less vigilant. So pair those two things together. Pair those two things. Higher vigilance and better mood. That makes it a good time for what social psychologists call insight problems. Problems with non-obvious solutions. Things that require you to iterate. Things that require more divergent thinking. Think about something like brainstorming. To be effective at brainstorming, to iterate new ideas, you don't want to be actually super focused and vigilant. You've been in brainstorming sessions with people who are super vigilant. That's a bad idea, that's a bad idea, that's a bad idea. That's not a productive brainstorming session, right? You want to be a little bit looser. And so certain kinds of tasks that we do on the job require, more conceptual thinking, more divergent thinking, a looser kind of mental approach. And this is it, folks. We should be doing our analytic work during the peak, our administrative work during the trough, and our insight work during the recovery. These are the design principles that science tells us very, very, very clearly. We can't tell anybody at a granular level, we should all start working at 7:35 a.m., we should work for 94 consecutive minutes and then take a 19-minute break. No. The granularity of it in your experience is going to be idiosyncratic from person to person, the specifics of it. But the broad design principles, most of us should be doing analytic work in the morning, administrative work in the middle of the day, and insight work later in the day. The design principles are pretty clear. They're backed by science. They're not that complicated. But here's the problem. We don't do that. I'm a sinner on this. I'm a writer. I test as not a full-fledged lark, but larky, toward the early side of the spectrum. I should be doing my writing in the morning. It's very clear to me. I should be doing my writing in the morning. And I've had many days as a writer, before I looked at this research, where I'd come into my office at 8:30, hey, ready to do some writing here, Dan, let's get started. Going to have a good day of writing. Got to check some email first. Let me check my email. Check my email, check more email, reply to some more email. It's cool, it's good, it's all good, it's all good. It might be 9:30, 9:45, but you know what? I've cleared the decks. Cleared that out, mentally ready to do some writing. But I'm going to get a muffin first. Let me get a muffin. Come back. Okay, there's probably something going on Twitter. Let me just check so I'm not distracted. 4 ESPN highlight reels later, it's lunchtime. I haven't done my most important work, and I'm trying to do writing during the trough, which is like riding a bicycle uphill against the wind. But I'll tell you who's worse than me. Every organization in America. And I'll tell you why. Think about this. How many of you work in organizations? Okay, so most of you. And in those organizations, how many of you ever go to meetings? When we schedule meetings in organizations, we use only one criterion. What is that? Somebody said it over here. Tell me your first name. Jill. Jill says availability, and Jill is exactly right. We don't say, what kind of meeting is this? Do we need people to be analytically fierce? Is this purely an administrative topic? Or do we want people to iterate new ideas? Who's going to be at this meeting? Are going to be early types? Are they going to be late types? No organization in America even asks those questions. Instead, we say, who's available? And is conference room 3C open? This one's actually not funny, okay? Because if you think about the enormous amount of time we spend in meetings, and the fact that the way we schedule them literally has zero strategic thinking behind it. It is the antithesis of strategic thinking in the way we schedule meetings. And yet we spend a preponderance of our time in these meetings. All right? We can do a lot better. And the reason we have to do a lot better is that we can make improvements here. One factoid, and then I'll give you some takeaways. Time of day effects explain about 20% of the variance in human performance on workplace tasks. So think about the statistical concept of variance, okay? So we're going to have a little chart here, and we're going to plot, like over here are the really good people, and here are the not so good people, and here are the medium people, okay? And we want to see how much variance there is. There's going to be some variance there. How do we explain variance and how people perform on the job? There are all kinds of explanations that can go into that. Some people are smarter than others. Some people are more conscientious than others. Some people have more social advantage than others, right? So all kinds of explanations for why there's variance in performance. But we're saying 20% of it is time of day? And here's what we can do. Here's some takeaways. And then do we have time for a couple questions, Connor? 1, be much more deliberate and intentional in scheduling individual and teamwork. When people work matters as much as what people actually do. How many of you have a to-do list today? You know what that is, folks? That's intentionality. That's intentionality. You're being intentional about what you're going to do. But when it comes to our when stuff, we're not intentional at all. We drift. 2, it's this simple. This is our you know how Michael Pollan has the rules of food? Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. It's basically this beautiful way to think about how do you plan your diet. This is a less elegant version of that, all right? Move analytic tasks to the peak, administrative tasks to the trough, and insight tasks to the recovery. It's that simple. 3, you got a whole chapter in this book that you're getting on breaks. What we should be doing, though, is we should be taking more breaks. We should be taking certain kinds of breaks, too. Breaks, to my mind, the science of breaks is where the science of sleep was 15 years ago. It's about to break through the surface, reshape what we think about human performance. And we know the best breaks are social rather than solo. We know you're better off taking a break when you're moving around. We're better off taking a break where we have an exposure to nature. And we're better off being fully detached during our breaks than semi-detached, either talking about work or on our phone. If we start taking these breaks, and the breaks have been a remedy for declining test scores, declining hand washing in hospitals, we can do better. So let me stop there and then take some questions, and then I'll take 30 seconds to wrap up at the very end. What are your questions? We have one over here. Hi, Kristen.
And so a lot of the data that you present
Right. Yeah, it's a great question. I'm going to repeat it because I'm not sure. What kind of physician are you, Kristen? Okay, so you're a hospitalist, but you focus on pediatrics. Okay, so Kristen asked a question about how, basically a kind of a reality check question, if I can rephrase, a reality check question saying, wait a second, we got to see patients all day. What can we do? Can we just like all kick off and have a siesta in the afternoon and not see patients? And the answer is, it's tough, and I'll tell you why, but let me tell you what some places are doing. Basically what they're doing is they're becoming much more intentional about breaks. And you see this actually more systematically in, not so much in primary care, but you see it more systematically in surgery. In the book I write about, I go to the University of Michigan Medical Center and stand in on some surgery. And what they do here is, in surgery is, there's a 1 o'clock surgery. They do this at all surgeries, but the 1 o'clock surgery, before they begin, every physician, not even every physician, both, all the physicians and the nurses and all the healthcare professionals, they literally call time out, like it's a basketball game. They call a time out, they literally take a physical step backward, and they go through a checklist. And that ends up restoring, something like that restores their vigilance. So you can have vigilance breaks like that. You can also have, I have to say, I think there has to be an argument for giving physicians in primary care more breaks. I mean, it's very, very difficult, and to me that's in some ways a problem of healthcare financing more than timing. Because the reason that physicians want to see a lot of patients is because they want to get a lot of RVUs, because that's how they're compensated. And so to me it exposes another flaw in how we compensate doctors and the financing system of healthcare, which is really, really messed up. But I got to tell you, there is so much evidence that high-level professionals perform differently and better after a break. And we see this in some very powerful research on judicial decision-making that shows that judges who are making decisions about, literally about human liberty, whether someone stays in prison or not, make radically different decisions before breaks and after breaks. And so to me, I think there's an urgency in giving physicians, especially primary care, more breaks, certain kinds of breaks. And in the hospital study that I mentioned, which is out of Duke, the work is, if you want to look it up, it's in the book, but you can. Its work is done by Katie Milkman and Brad Statz. When you have this deterioration in hand washing in the hospitals in the afternoon, the remedy for nurses especially was giving nurses more breaks and giving nurses social breaks, certain kinds of breaks, where they could take 15 minutes, they would pair up with somebody else, and they would take a walk outside. And that ended up lifting up those hospitals. So it's a tough, tough issue. I have to say the medical profession has done a good job on certain things. Checklist is revolutionary in some ways in surgery. There also had been in medicine, I think, something called the July effect, where in teaching hospitals, you had new residents coming in, people 10 minutes out of medical school coming in and actually treating patients, and big surprise, there was a pretty large spike in morbidity and mortality in hospitals in July. It was called the July effect. It's called the July effect. In Britain, where the new residents come in August, they have a saltier term for it. They call it the August killing season. All right? And so this is a problem. All right? This is a problem in teaching hospitals. But many teaching hospitals have responded to this temporal difference in performance by embedding these people, just a few weeks out of medical school in teams, rather than forcing them to do it solo. So there are remedies out there, and I think the healthcare profession has done a good job. But to me, this is a problem of as much as financing as anything else. That's all the time we have? One more? Connor says it's all the time we have, so we'll take one more. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So let me quickly summarize the question. So she asked about basically two things: the effect of introducing light to try to alter people's cycles, and also basically different changes in chronobiology over time. Let me be very brief on this. Yeah, it's possible that you can work the margins in changing people based on the introduction of light, because our cycles are partly innately fiercely biological, but we also engage in something called entrainment, is that we entrain to cues in our environment, including light. You can work the margins there, but it's only the margins. These qualities of chronotype are pretty heavily fixed in a particular moment. We do not have. Turning a lark into an owl or an owl into a lark is essentially impossible. You can work the margins. You can make someone slightly less owly, slightly less larky, but they just work the margins. The final thing that you mentioned, and I'll end on this, is teenagers. Teenagers experience a massive change in their chronobiology. Little kids are very larky. When in the mid-teens to the mid-20s, people become extraordinarily owly. They shift maybe 2-3 hours toward lateness. And this is why the American Academy of Pediatrics, Kristen probably knows this, the American Academy of Pediatrics 4 years ago issued a policy statement imploring schools across America, do not start school for teenagers before 8:30 in the morning. It is contraindicated by everything that we know, and yet the typical school start time in America is 8:03 a.m. This is one of those issues in public policy and in science that is not a close call. Many times science is murky, ambiguous, we don't know, maybe this or that. This one's not a freaking close call at all. Schools should start later for teenagers, and the school districts that have moved start times for teenagers. And we're not talking about starting at 2 in the afternoon. We're talking about moving school start time to 9:15. School districts that have done that across America have seen lower dropout rates, less teen obesity, less teen depression, fewer car accidents, and higher standardized test scores. And the lovely way to end on that is the following, is that what it means that we have to take these questions of when seriously. They are material in our lives, and if we take them seriously, we can live better and work smarter. Thank you, Madison.